Good morning also from my side to everyone. And I would argue it's always very excited to talk about innovation. And there is, of course, hardly any industry which is embracing innovation as much as the automotive sector, right? We are currently in the midst of a transition already from the combustion engine to the electric vehicle. And while, let's say, we see some challenges on the horizon there, it's not necessarily coming as a surprise, right? And so I would always describe this as a transition from two stable states with an unfreezing part in the middle. And with this uncertainty and insecurity is also an opportunity for companies, for technology companies, for OEMs, for regulators to thrive and really make a difference. And the next much more radical change is actually the transition to safer, smarter, connected, automated, and ultimately autonomous cars. So the cars will become the most sophisticated, the most desirable, and the most complex IoT device. This means technology, speed, and scale will matter more than ever before. Customers will probably still pick a specific brand, body style, powertrain, but more and more of brand differentiation will actually come from software and service. And when we think about the automated and software-defined vehicle, a lot of what is happening is actually happening under the hood, meaning the operating system of the vehicle, several platforms, middlewares, zone controllers. But the main question we have to ask ourselves on behalf of the consumer is actually quite simple. It's, so what? What is in there for me? And it's probably not necessarily always more maximum speed or more horsepower. It's, let's say, the ultimate automated software-defined vehicle is sleek, reduced, accomplished, and really thought from a customer point of view. It's about use cases and value add. So one of the topics which is often being discussed, right, is that you can essentially enable certain features and functionalities which are available in a new car on a permanent or temporary basis through these feature on demand. A very controversial topic, right, in the automotive industry, right? But I think one of the early use cases has often been using like more traditional value add, like a heated seat in a new car and use software and functionalities to enable this. And I think we have to approach it slightly differently. We have to think about new use cases and new value add powered by software and over-the-air updates to be applied maybe even in older cars, or maybe cars which are already on the road, right? Because the vehicles coming equipped with so many smart components, batteries, electric motors, sensors, detectors, cameras, and there's so much opportunity to build new use cases, new application, new value add, also after the hardware has already been installed, and then using the technologies and continuously develop in a more abstract way between hardware and software, deploying this over the air, and then we can give more range to the battery, higher performance, more payload capabilities into the vehicles also after the initial sale of the car. So this gives for consumers the opportunity to use the car longer, potentially even have a higher resale value, and it gives also an opportunity for automotive companies, let's say, to build new revenue streams and stay engaged with the consumers. And the benefit of the connected, automated, and software-defined vehicle is actually not only limited to the car itself. The ultimate software-defined vehicle gives a holistic answer on autonomous driving. So as Hyundai, we are, of course, heavily engaged, and we have a lot of real-world experience through our affiliate Motional in the United States, through our tech company 42 Dot in Korea, which is also on the SDV, software-defined and autonomous vehicle stack, and through partnerships such as recently announced the one with Waymo also in North America. But the real benefit is actually not only the software stack, but the autonomous driving cars will unlock a lot of potential for use cases such as mobility as a service. So it gives the opportunity for people in cities to go really from door to door without the need of owning a car in a very affordable way. Shared autonomous mobility, on-demand transportation, robotaxi services. With autonomous driving, these type of services will, let's say, will lose the biggest buck they have currently in their business model, which is the driver, right? And this will make it much more affordable and reimagine how people move seamlessly and sustainably from A to B. And there is more reasons to be optimistic about, let's say, the automated and electric car. And I think cars will be much more affordable, not only because electric cars will get more and more affordable from a price point of view, but also in many parts of the world, electricity is already much cheaper than gasoline. And we have to make transportation and automotive CO2 neutral as a whole. And this is a complex, but actually quite manageable task. especially when we think about electric and automated vehicle, because cars will become part of the public electricity management system. It can help to shave off peaks of oversupply of renewable energies. In countries like Germany, this is several hundreds of hours a year where wind parks have to be turned off or taken off the grid because there are moments where there is an oversupply of renewable energies. This is where vehicles can serve as a gigantic power banks for cities, regions, or households. It is really an opportunity to balance renewable energies, and consumers will be benefiting from that. They might be compensated in a way that charging might be free of charge in certain parts of the city. We have actually engaged in vehicle-to-grid and bidirectional charging, because this is what I'm talking about now, already a couple of years back. And it all started in the city of Utrecht, where the city had a very ambitious vision to be CO2 neutral in a certain neighborhood and only power this neighborhood on renewable energies. And this is only possible if you couple the energy and the mobility sector. So we deployed a fleet of vehicles with Ioniq 5 electric cars with bidirectional charging capabilities in a car sharing model. So whenever residents of this neighborhood needed to resort to a car, they took the Ioniq 5. After they're done with their trip, they return it to a bidirectional charger. So ultimately, the car is charging, let's say, renewable energies when there is enough renewable energy available, and then discharges at the peak hours in the morning or in the afternoon when there is more renewable energy needed. And these benefits we saw from this pilot prompted us also to bring this technology in production cars. So the Ioniq 9, our next model in the Ioniq family, is now coming with vehicle-to-grid capabilities. And our sister brand Kia has already a vehicle on the market with vehicle-to-grid capabilities. And vehicle-to-grid is just one element of our broader vehicle-to-everything strategy. And we have actually already embarked to the next journey. And this time more on safety. But again, it somehow started in the Netherlands, because we have made an agreement with Rijkswaterstaat, the Dutch Ministry of Transportation and Water Infrastructure, to bring vehicle-to-infrastructure applications into large-scale real-world application. And this time, again, more on safety. What we are doing is the ministry is sharing traffic accident information and real-time information of emergency vehicles, such as ambulances and police cars. And we are able to display this directly in the head unit of the car. So the drivers of a Hyundai vehicle will know when an emergency vehicle is approaching at around 250 to 500 meters, from which direction it is coming, so that drivers can more efficiently yield the right of way to the emergency vehicle. And the beauty is that this is just one use case, emergency vehicle approaching, which you can realize, but the underlying technology is just able to do so much more. And the other beauty is also that this is not a small pilot with a small fleet in a small geo-fenced area. This is actually going in all the vehicles, all the Hyundai and Kia vehicles through over-the-air updates. So we will make this available beginning of next year, also backwards compatible to a lot of cars which are already on the road in the Netherlands. So what really excites us is what is going to be possible if cars start talking to each other and talking to the infrastructure. So the cars will be able to broadcast its position, speed, direction, latitude, longitude 10 times per second, and the infrastructure will be able to respond to that, giving red light violation warning, curve speed warning, pedestrian in signalized intersection warning. And we have been engaged in many of these early stage pilots, whether this is in Germany with the German motorway operator, in Austria with the ASFINAG, the Austrian motorway operators, and in many other different of these first initiatives. And we are really driving these topics forwards and also are ready to deploy this in a larger scale. So more and more cars are becoming connected, but what does it actually mean? So a connected car, for us, is a car that features intelligent system. It's not just the SIM card or the infotainment system or one feature. It is an ecosystem that provides better trips, safer trips, smarter trips, and more reliable trips. And of course, also the interaction with the vehicle through generative AI is getting much more seamless and easier, more natural from a human being. And it will also allow us to, let's say, learn, grow, and further personalize. So if we buy the next generation of vehicles, whether this is a Hyundai, a Kia, or other innovative cars, on the first day, the experience we have in the head unit will probably be very similar for the user, but then it will actually adjust based on the applications that people are using, based on the preferences. So it is not the people adjusting to the car, but the car adjusting to the people. So I'm leaving you with that. I think as an OEM, for most of the years, we really worried about how we are going to sell more cars. And today, I think we worry about what if all we do is selling more cars. The cars are becoming platform, the cars are becoming part of an ecosystem. And it's not only the best car, but also the car who really brings the broader experience to the consumers, which will be the vehicle of choice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for that great overview. And of course, you mentioned IoT, Internet of Things. I mean, we started calling it machine to machine, but maybe we'll have an Internet of Cars, which is actually a 360 ecosystem, as you mentioned. And also, don't worry, we have a representative from the Dutch Ministry on our panel, so you will hear a bit more about that as well. But now I'm going to turn over the floor for the presentation of ACEA's automation roadmap to Michael Wolfert, Head of Automated and Autonomous Driving Public Affairs at Volkswagen Group. Michael.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. For some of you, you might have been here before, as the ACEA Experience Center has been open for some time, and it's quite a great exhibit and a great location. Thank you for this introduction, and to be honest, this is an honor for me to present and have been asked by ACEA to present this roadmap. About 6 to 7 years ago, 2018, we already had a roadmap. Some of you may know this. It's fairly outdated. So we decided as a group, and appreciate Pierre Millet's input as a CTO of ACEA and his support, to create a new task force within ACEA on automated vehicles and automated driving. And so we wanted to update this roadmap that we had for some time. Back in the time, Joost van Tom was instrumental in putting that together. Some of you know him. He's still very active in Brussels. So that was an important step, but things have changed a little bit since 2018, as you can imagine. And so we decided to look at all the different roadmaps that are out there. There are so many worldwide. There are so many white papers, and automation, autonomous driving has been a topic for some time. And we as industry, we had high expectations, and some expectations were met, some not. So we're going to be very honest on that. So we are still working on this topic, and we still think this is a very important topic for us as industry. And so appreciate your introduction on this, as the Commission is now starting a new phase. We see how much of that topic will be implemented in their plans, hopefully a little bit more than in the past. So I would like to dive right in. Now, this is a very concentrated and brief roadmap. For those of you who have already seen it, I didn't prepare any slides because the roadmap itself only has 5 slides. So I'm going to go through it briefly and just touch upon the major topics that we wanted to bring across and that we have published. The reason we have done this is to really help with the necessary information. And this is the first time for EU institutions and member states and any policymaker really to have an idea of what the industry is really planning, what are our use cases, and what is our focus. So this is something that's hard to read, to be honest, for you. But it's a small group, but maybe you can read a little bit. So the first part of this topic is kind of an introduction on what do we understand automated or autonomous driving. You know, all of you who are already involved in this area, you know about the different levels of SAE, level 2, 3, 4, and so forth. So this is, in simple language, trying to explain what we understand automation to be. And I think the major difference here that I want to focus on is we have some technologies where you can compare it to a level 3 automation, where we have a driver in the car that can pause for a moment and let the car take over certain areas, certain times. And that is like an advancement of assisted driving. And then we have what we call autonomous driving, or in that case, we call it advanced automated driving, is where we really have no steering wheel. So that's what we call autonomous driving, where there's no steering wheel necessary. And I think for most of you, this is something that you know, so I'm going to skip through this a little quicker. Now, these are the use cases that we wanted to focus on as industry. Over the time, this has changed a little bit. Sometimes we have focused on this area, sometimes we focus on another area. And these are the major use cases we have focused on as industry as we worked on this roadmap. So I'm going to start with, and I'm glad Tobias is here from Daimler Trucks. He can talk about this a little later in more detail. The hub-to-hub freight transport and yard operations. This is focusing on logistics. If you imagine, and Markus mentioned the highway, in Germany, highway is always an important topic for Germans, and I'm from Germany, so Autobahn is a big point for us. But this is more talking about logistics. So when you have a truck that's going long distance slowly, or from a German point of view, very slowly, sometimes too slowly, and when they are traveling and transporting goods, we see a great opportunity to improve by our technology ideas this concept, this use case, where we have a driver shortage in Europe, and we have the opportunity to have an automated truck go from one hub to another, and this is something where we see great benefits for industry and society. Yard operation is something that we already have in the industry. So in a yard, whether it be a port or mining, where we already have a lot of automation in place. And then the last kind of logistical part on the top right there, you see last mile delivery. So this is also a use case where we see great benefits for automation. On the bottom, you see 3 use cases that I wanted to focus on a little bit more. So passenger services. This is something that maybe some of you know as robo-taxi or shuttles or however you want to call it. But basically a system where, or use case where we have persons who want to go from one place to another, and this is something done by a shuttle that is not driven by a driver. So that's the use case that we think has a high chance for success in the cities in Europe. Another thing that's maybe a little bit more specific is the so-called automated valet parking. That's something we already have as an industry in some places in Europe installed. Something where you can, and this is especially helpful for those of you in Brussels here that have to go to the airport a lot and back, so you can drop off your car and don't have to worry about parking it anymore, especially if you live in a city where you don't know where to park your car anyway. And then the last use case that we have focused on is the private vehicles, on, for instance, on highways where, yes, we have systems on already level 3 that are type approved and are working in Europe. So that would be then the next phase of a level 4 vehicle where you actually can let the car take over and you don't have to go back to taking control of the car. So that's something that is the next step for autonomous driving. Now, the benefits of all this topic, I think this is not very new for most of you. This has been the case in the past, but I would like to highlight maybe 1 or 2 things on the benefits of this topic. We are talking about a new commission. We are talking about new ideas or new concepts that we want to implement as Europe. And talking about competitiveness, I think this is one of the major topics here. We see that in the US and in China, we see a lot of development on automation, autonomous driving. Companies are very successful, are very active, spending a lot of money on this topic, and are being supported by their respective governments to do that. And with an election in the US recently, we also see a lot of moving parts in that direction. And so if we as Europeans want to be competitive in that regard, this would be something, a technology that's worthwhile investing in, and something that we need to focus as a European market. It goes hand in hand with the innovation capabilities. If we want to have European companies who have the know-how, to have the competence, to have the skill set to implement these types of technologies, then we need to set the right frame to make this a possibility. We talked a little bit about sustainability, electric mobility. Markus mentioned this. Of course, these automated vehicles are electric vehicles. They are sustainable in that regard, but I want to highlight the use case of a shuttle. If you talk about a ride pooling use case, for instance, then you have an advantage where you can reduce the traffic in a city where by pooling the customers to actually use an automated vehicle, and so have an additional sustainability benefit. Safety and comfort are typical points. So safety is, these systems need to be safer than a human driver, else it's no point of doing it, really. So we do have advantages. The computer won't be drunk. He won't be distracted. He will be able to perform its task without getting tired or anything. So this is a point where safety needs to be a benefit, else it's no point of doing it. So that's why I think sometimes we as Europeans are a little slower, because we want to make sure that these systems really are a benefit and not an additional risk. Then 2 more slides. So recommendations, what can we do? Now this order of slide doesn't mean that it has to be step 1, 2, 3 in that order. It's just 5 recommendations that we as industry feel are helpful to discuss. So I already touched upon the competitiveness, safety, and innovative capabilities. Mentioned workforce already. Maybe one thing I would like to highlight, though, is that's the first point of here in competitiveness. We are very grateful and appreciative of the support that the Commission, especially DG GROW, is doing on setting the necessary framework in Europe for type approval of these vehicles. We do see, however, a kind of a barrier that we have for the scalability of our use cases. So currently we can only deploy up to a small series registration, and that's something that we see as a great problem, a great challenge. Now, of course, we don't have 1,000 vehicles in Brussels that are driving around autonomously. I understand that. But in order to make the business case available for an investment for us as industry, we do need to have the scalability options to scale up the system in order to make it happen, in order to make it successful, in order to make it available case. And finally, this is the result of an anonymous feedback from the members of ACEA, where we have aligned to when will what company, so we don't know exactly who is behind this, of course, due to competitiveness regulation, which is good. So I don't know who is doing what, but this is our time frame where we really see, and what we believe in will be the start or the current already existing technology use cases to be implemented in Europe in the next 3 to 4 years. And the reason I wanted to point out, this is the point where the UN is working on this, which is great. The EU is working on making these happening, but if we wait too long, we see a discrepancy here, or a problem between 26 and 27. So this is really the time frame in the next few years that will decide if we will be able to successfully and be able to be a real competitor in the global market, if we as Europeans can provide these services and these technologies in our European market. And I believe we can, but I believe we have to do some homework in order to make this happen. We as industry, policymakers, the member states, Germany and France have been very active on this already, which is great. The Netherlands are very active. Spain is doing a lot. And so we need to continue on that path, and we need to be able to really make it a reality. And I think that the society and the industry and we as customers will then benefit from these technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And you're going to stay on for our Euractiv panel debate, which we will just set up the stage for. I'll remind you that if you want to share your thoughts, you can use the hashtag FutureDriven. Do pick the social media of your choice so that we can make people who aren't here in the room today a little bit jealous. I will also remind you that if you didn't have time to take a photograph of the slides, that the roadmap is available on the ACEA website, so you can look through those details and facts and figures in more detail. So we have joining us, as I mentioned at the very outstart, a great lineup of speakers. You've heard some of them mentioned already, but I'd like to invite to the stage Mohammed Rami, who is Policy Officer on Regulations for Autonomous Driving and Connected Vehicles in DG GROW at the European Commission, and comes with a long personal background in working on automated driving as well, so something of an expert for us today. Lennart Salmink is Head of Department of Vehicles and Digital Infrastructure at the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water, possibly a little bit less relevant to us today, but we've heard a bit about the work they're doing in the Netherlands. And last but not least, Dr. Tobias Schweikart is responsible for regulatory strategy of connected and autonomous vehicles at Daimler Truck, and will of course be able to bring us a bit more on the freight side of our discussion today. Mohammed, let me start with you. Let's have a very, in a nutshell, brief introduction to yourself and what you're working on.
Thanks. Thanks a lot first for the invitation, and it's an honor for me to be here with you. I'm working in the unit of DG GROW, which is taking care of type approval regulations for automated and connected driving. That means we have automated and connected vehicles, many topics, safety-related topics, but also big focus on automated driving. And I personally joined the Commission 7 months ago, and before that, I had 10 years experience in the industry in Germany on OEM side and supplier side. And then I joined the European Commission to shape the future with you together.
Thank you. Lennart, brief introduction from you. We'll get into some more details about what you're working on, but why have you found it important to be here today?
Well, there are many reasons why it is important. Maybe it's good to start telling that currently I'm driving a Volkswagen ID3. I know that the battery actually comes from South Korea. I looked it up. And my previous car, and I was very happy with it as well, was a Hyundai Kona, actually. And I'm here for a few reasons. The first reason is, as the Dutch government, we very much believe in the public-private partnerships, and that we only can advance when we work together. You already, thank you very much for mentioning the projects that we have, for example, with Hyundai. Also, Volkswagen is involved in a few of those safety priority services that we have. A few months ago, I was with the previous minister, Harbers, in Stuttgart to visit Mercedes, one of the other great manufacturers of Europe, to discuss the cooperation that we have on what we call road monitor, because all those cars that are driving around, they of course have all those sensors and technology, and they actually can see earlier when it's getting icy, for example, than our human road operators can. So it's very important that we have that cooperation as well. Today, actually, I'm here with very much a core message, the same core message as I had last Friday, also in Brussels at the high-level road safety meeting, where we were discussing automated vehicles. We harmonized actually type approval on a European level, and we are very excited about that, something that the Netherlands was always pushing for, that we have a European framework for that. But a few of the answers are still unanswered. A few questions are unanswered. For example, liability. If you don't have to hold the steer yourself, then who's responsible? And are we going to answer the question in 27 different member states, or are we going to answer the question on a European level? And the second one, and that one is very important for car manufacturers as well, is, for example, market surveillance. If 27 different frameworks for market surveillance are being applied, and it's very tough for European or non-European car manufacturers actually to scale up in Europe. And I think there we very much have to work together. And the roadmap that I saw today gives, I think, a great starting point for that discussion.
We will certainly be looking at harmonisation. I know it was one of the points that was bolded on Michael's slides. And finally, Tobias, your brief opening remarks before we get into the detail.
Yeah, sure. Tobias Schweikart, I'm responsible for regulatory strategy at Daimler Truck for connected and autonomous vehicles. Yeah. Typically, if I say Mercedes-Benz, you think of nice passenger cars. So I'm here today to remind you that you also should think of trucks bringing the food to your supermarket, and of buses bringing your children to school, and to talk about what automation can bring there, and what's the current status and the outlook.
Thank you. Well, let's dive straight into the regulatory side of things. And Mohammed, I'll start with you to perhaps talk a little bit through the evolution of the regulatory framework. And, we've seen a lot of developments in recent years. Are we on the right track? What are the developments that are still needed to support the widespread deployment of automated vehicles? I know Michael has given us an overview, but give us some more meat on the bones.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So first, maybe would like to summarize what happened until now, and I think we made very good progress the last 4 to 5 years. So we have now regulations for the different automation levels, which have been presented before. So we have regulation for assisted driving. We have a regulation for partially automated driving. This is also what we call L3 systems. And we have a regulation for autonomous driving, L4 systems, but focusing only on 3 use cases, which from the use cases which were presented before. So we have the hub-to-hub use case. We have the passenger transport use case like shuttle, buses, and robotaxi. And we have the automated valet parking use case. So this is the current status. And the work which has been done there was a collaborative work at EU level, but also at mainly at UN level, because we are all interested in globally harmonized regulations. That's why the regulations for the assisted driving system and the partially automated systems, that means the L2 and L3, they were done at global level with big contribution from the European Commission, backed by our joint research center. So it's a research center which belongs to the European Commission, which can deliver also fact-based recommendations and the results from test campaigns and so on. And once these regulations are adopted at UN level, we have just to do the so-called transposition step to make it available at the EU type approval framework. And this is, by the way, which we have done recently for this so-called DCAS systems, like L2 automated driving systems or assisted driving systems. And now the regulation is also applicable at the European level. Now I also would like to say that in some, it depends on the automation level, but for some automation levels, the regulation is almost ready and allows more than what the technology or what the industry now is doing. If we look at this L3 system, partially automated driving on the highway, where you can take off your hands and do something else, the regulation allows a speed until 130 kilometer per hour, allows also lane changes, but we see that the industry is doing more like stepwise approach, step by step. They started with 60 kilometer per hour, and then we have seen recently that the Mercedes has increased it to 95 kilometer per hour. On the other hand, when it comes to highly automated driving, L4 systems, there I would like to give you some background. So initially the work started at UN level, but then the European Commission noticed that the work is taking too long to be achieved in time. That's why we decided to take what we have at that time and create a regulation for the at European level. And we created this regulation already 2022, so August 2022. But as said, this regulation has the limitation that we have this small series scheme. That means it's limited to 1,500 vehicles per year, per model. And this is something we are working on now. There are reasons for this. The first reason is we wanted to do this also stepwise approach, but there is another technical reason, because in order to create a regulation for automated driving systems, we have to solve all the conflicts with the existing regulations. We have about 100 regulations which are dealing with the type approval itself. And there we have to make sure that they are coherent with the automated driving systems. That's why we have to do a lot of checks and amendments and so on. And this is the reason why first we introduced it with limited series, but now we are working on removing this. And our rough plan for this is 2026.
Well, I know there is a lot of work going on. I'm going to call this the regulatory transition. We love a transition in Brussels. And Michael, I'm going to ask you, how can the public and the private work together? And what is the industry doing to facilitate this regulatory transition?
Thank you. Before I answer this, I'm going to have to say I'm grateful you upgraded from a Hyundai to a Volkswagen. Sorry, I had to say that, Markus. So, but to answer your question, events like this, a perfect example. So, this is a great opportunity to go into a dialogue to discuss these topics. I think it's necessary. And we are also part of the work that DG Grow is doing. DG Grow is doing an excellent job in involving the member states, involving the industry, involving the associations. And so I think the dialogue is there, the platforms are there, and I think that we need to continue to work together. I think this is something that we're already doing, and I think what would be helpful really is what I mentioned earlier, is to really have the new EU institutions be aware of this topic and have it involved in their actual working program. I think this is where we have an opportunity now to put this on the agenda.
Tobias, same question to you. I mean, how is the industry, from your perspective, getting involved with helping to drive and helping to assist these regulatory transitions that we're talking about in the right way, so that it is sustainable and it is future-proofed?
Yeah, I think, and we will probably come to that. Of course, automated driving needs a business case in order to be viable, but it also needs to have societal benefits in order to be widely accepted. Yeah. And I think we see them all over the place. Of course, one of the most important use cases for Daimler Truck will be the hub-to-hub transport, which Michael has explained earlier. And he has already explained we have a significant driver shortage at a time where we have growing demand for road freight. We have drivers that need to stay away from home for long times because they need to go across continents, with their vehicle. So we have drivers that are get sleepy while driving. So there are societal benefits for trucking, but also in other areas where you can make mobility more accessible to people, where you also have environmental benefits from autonomous driving. So lots of good aspects of autonomous driving that make it also very attractive to society to embrace it.
Leonard, I mean, you in your opening remarks mentioned how enthusiastic the Netherlands generally is towards autonomous driving. Talk to me about harmonization and the necessity to make that work across borders, and then perhaps expand a little bit on why steering from the European Commission on these pan-European laws is important.
Well, I think it was 2016 when the Netherlands was chair of the European Commission. And by the time I was advisor to the minister, who by the time was making pictures together with the King of the Netherlands next to, in a car actually, and they were both holding their hands in the air like this car is self-driving. By the time it was not a self-driving car, but it was very much to put it in the agenda that it was important that we harmonize our EU legislation when it comes to automated vehicles. And we are very excited about the work that has been done on the European level. And as Mohammed has introduced, like the legislation that we now have since 2022, also together with the UNECE regulation. But to some extent, that's only the tip of the iceberg. So the work actually starts from here. For example, when the General Safety Regulation came into force, we realized in the Netherlands that if we want to fully implement this General Safety Regulation, we have to change up to 10 laws in the Netherlands. The first 3 laws we will send to Parliament actually in the coming half a year. And we will inform Parliament within a month or so about what we expect there. But that's actually the whole point. Like, if we, as 27 different member states, are going to implement the General Safety Regulation and the future regulations of the European Union in a different way, all in our national frameworks, then we're somehow missing the opportunities of automated driving. So I think a strong cooperation there is necessary. We were just discussing actually that the projects that we had in the past, to put it in the agenda, where we had the challenges of truck platooning, so not fully self-driving, but in the early stage of self-driving cars, trucks coming from Rotterdam, from the port to going to Germany. Well, I think it's important that we keep cooperating with different member states together with the European Commission, but also with the private industry to see what are the challenges are there. What are the things that are fine to regulate on a national level, but also where it is important that we work together with the European Commission and the UNECE to have a global framework or a European framework of our innovations. Otherwise, we're missing out on the opportunities that we have.
Mohammed, perhaps, I mean, we can build on this point of harmonization, but I'd also like you to bring in the other aims that the European Commission, including DG Grow, is to take into account, including the green transition, a focus on electrification, and how that is being, if you like, dovetailed with the regulation we're seeing on autonomous driving.
Before answering that point, I would like to maybe
Yeah,
comment
of course.
the goal of the harmonization. So we recognize this already. So we are working on this, but for now we are working on this as a kind of a guideline. So we don't have the power for now to do more than that. So we are working on guidelines, and these guidelines, they are divided in 3 levels. So the first level is when it comes to testing of automated driving for the pre-approval phase. And this already was already released. So it was discussed and shared with the member states and was released. And now the next step, which we are working on, the next 2 steps are the tests during the type approval itself, because we don't want the tests to be repeated in different countries, but we can imagine something like small delta tests, which have to be done in specific countries. And then the next level would be the high scale development and deployment. So we are
Exactly, yeah.
developing guidelines on all these 3 levels. Now, the other part of the question, so I think it is worth to mention the CCAM partnership. Maybe some of you heard about that or already are involved. This is a partnership under the European Horizon program, and it has already 230 stakeholders, and it has a very ambitious goal. But also, my point of view, it is something which is very, very systematic and very well defined. So they are working on 3 phases. The first phase from 21 to 24 was focusing about defining the building blocks and the goals, and they have followed very systematic approach, also tackling the questions which were mentioned in the roadmap, and defining the objectives and accordingly defining the steps which have to be done to do that. The next step is from 2024 until 2028, which is focusing on technology advancement, and also always having the goal is the large scale deployments, because we have noticed that there are many projects, many research projects, many demonstrations, but what is missing is the step to go to large scale deployment. And exactly the third phase of this partnership is large scale demonstrations at European level, and this will be from 2022 to 2030.
Michael, I want to pick up on what Tobias said about the business case. Now, if we say that there may need to be some more investment to deliver, then surely we always tie that into a question about de-risking when we look at what maybe we could be done on EU level. How important is that? Creating the trust needed with consumers that creates a de-risking investment or incentive, but also reducing the red tape in terms of, if you like, administrative burden or regulatory burden from the investment de-risking case.
Understand. Well, talking as a Volkswagen employee, we've had some setbacks on investments. Some of you may know. So it depends on the use case. Let me give you an example. If you think about the shuttle use case, a lot of times these public transport operators, they would like to have these shuttles that we are working on, and they ask us for it. Of course, these shuttles are equipped with technology that a normal shuttle or normal bus is not equipped with. So it's very expensive technology, and the operation of it is very expensive. And these public transport operators, they don't have money. Usually they're in the red anyway, at least in Germany and most other countries. So they don't have the money to invest largely. So I think one aspect that would be helpful, as we are on a European scale here, is to provide the opportunities for the member states to actually open some funds, some forms of investments for public transport operators to invest in this technology, and not just in a research project where there is one vehicle that drives from A to B for 2 years and then that's it, but to actually have it as part of the public transport system in a city, that people can get used to it, they can get acquainted with it, and that they actually see the benefits. Now, when it comes to the customers, the research that we have been doing is not that the customers are afraid to try it out, to look into this and to drive with these types of vehicles in general in Europe. This is not a challenge in that regard. Of course, it's important to stay in a dialogue with the customers and the society about this, but so that's not a major issue from our point of view. But to have the opportunity to invest in this, and this is a lot of money that we need to invest. Now, Volkswagen is one of the few groups as OEMs that still invest heavily in this technology. Others have slowed down a little bit, but if you look at companies like Google that have invested heavily into Waymo in the US and continue to invest, this is how they are going to be successful in that area. And that's something we need as Europeans to do as well in order to make it successful.
Leonard, I'd like your thoughts as well on this legal certainty that can help drive investment from various points of view, including public transport.
I can just very much actually support the point here. And there are also competitive blocks, not in the European Union, but outside of the European Union, that actually give a lot of space for testing, and by collecting also large portions of data about what certain systems can do in certain environments. And indeed, we are now implementing the European framework for testing a European on Dutch roads, actually, to make that possible on a much more large scale. But I think it is important that we, as European Union in general, give space for testing new kinds of use cases on Dutch roads and European roads. We are the number 4 type approval agency in Europe, so we also do type approval, for example, for Hyundai and other brands outside the European Union, also from within the European Union. And one of the major questions that we get right now is, to what extent can we do our testing here in the Netherlands or in Europe to see if this use case is applicable on a large scale? And so far, actually, the type approval was organized like it was very digital in a sense, like it was yes or no. So you do type approval as RDW or any other agency, and then the vehicle was approved on the European roads, and it can drive around for the lifetime, and it can be 10 or 20 years for a vehicle. That entire framework is actually changing right now. So in the beginning, you need to have a public-private partnership to do the testing, to see to what extent the use cases do actually what we expect them to do. And the norms that we get from both the European Union on a national level and UNEC are now open norms. For example, the lane change or ALKS or automated driving, the requirement that we get is that they have to drive as safe as an average driver. What is an average driver? And when should our RDW say, well, this was an average driver in the circumstances here in the Netherlands? So we give the type approval, for example, on a European scale. And then there's a market surveillance agency, for example, in France or in Italy or in Bulgaria, would say, well, this was actually less safe than the average driver. And then you have to prove as a manufacturer to the market surveillance agency in that specific country why it was safe enough, although actually you did the type approval via, for example, the agency in the Netherlands. Well, by giving a few of those dilemmas, that was what I referred to by saying that just organizing type approval is to some extent only the tip of the iceberg, because the whole stage in between large-scale deployment and type approval means actually collecting data and a public-private partnership, because that's also a very European way of thinking, of course, that you do that together in a public and private way. And I think it has a lot of charms and advantages. You have to see what the use cases are and whether it's safe enough. Also to give investment security for private companies to make sure that the investments, that we keep them in the European Union, because we also see car manufacturers who say, well, it is a little bit complicated right now in Europe. We may first go to other blocks like the United States, develop our use cases there, and then if everything is working, we see what the European Union is doing. And I think that would be very much a missed opportunity, both for us as member states in the European Union, but also for private companies.
Tobias, you mentioned the business case. I mean, how much is the business case dependent on de-risking or regulatory certainty?
I mean, in the trucking business, I think automated driving has a very clear value proposition. Yeah, much clearer than in other parts, and therefore we have a clear driving force to develop autonomous driving. Now, as Leonard mentioned, most competitors and we do as well are developing and targeting an deployment first in the south of US. And regulatory landscape is part of the reason, but I wouldn't say it's the most important reason. It's the ecosystem, it's the good weather. Yeah, and very simple, for the business case in trucking, you need to have long routes, high frequent routes that you need for goods transport in order to play the business case. Yeah, and you have that in the US. And even if you, I mean, often we complain about the fragmented legislative landscape in Europe, yeah. But I think first of all, the European Union is doing a good job in harmonizing overall, and secondly, we have the same in the US. Yeah, you have the different states, but the difference is within one state you still can drive 1,000 miles, because and it's difficult to do that in Europe without crossing borders. Yeah, so to make a long story short. There are a lot of reasons why, especially trucking business will start in the US, and that can be taken for granted. But it will, once it gets going, it will come to Europe, and then the frame conditions need to be ready in Europe. Yeah. So currently, I don't think we can blame regulatory framework that nothing is happening. But in future, there needs to be the framework in order to enable the business case clearly, and especially long-haul trucking. Of course, as I said, needs pan-national regulations. Yeah.
Well, I think you make a good point in comparison with the US. You can drive 1,000 miles, you're still in the same state. In Europe, you drive 1,000 miles, the language has changed 3 times and the bread is different. So we know that's something we see online, this is a kind of a meme. But it makes the point that local is also important. We talk about harmonization. Let's talk a bit about, infrastructure. Lennart, isn't infrastructure inherently local?
To some extent, it is local, but also like infrastructure is local, but also the culture in traffic is very local. The example that we give a lot, actually, also within the Benelux, which is a relatively small part of Europe, densely populated though. But in the Netherlands, if you want to change lanes, you have to see if there are space, and only then you give direction. In Belgium, you give direction and you actually ask for space. So that's also a cultural difference. So what is actually that we demand here, for example, from our OEMs to implement in their systems? Infrastructure is very local, although there it is very doable actually to come to standards that are applicable, I think, for different sorts of technology. And actually, we already are in the states that we have to do that for most of our ADAS systems that are driving around. They are actually safe enough to not to have them as not only voluntarily but also compulsory on many cars right now. For example, the intelligent speed system or emergency brake systems. They're to some extent also depending on the state of the infrastructure, but we also already implement them. So yeah, to some extent we have to harmonize them. But I think in the past we were thinking about the digital infrastructure as well, CITS. Right now, we see that the development of the vehicles is very much that the sensors are within the car, so we don't have to harmonize right now. Maybe in the future, not excluding that, of course. I know there are developments there as well, but we don't have to harmonize the digital infrastructure right now. So I think that makes it actually relatively easier than, for example, in 2016 when we came up with the Declaration of Amsterdam, and we were also expecting the harmonization of CITS. Now it's actually just the traditional infrastructure that has to be harmonized enough. For example, that a traffic sign is somehow comparable between Italy, the Netherlands, and Norway. That should be doable from my perspective, I would say.
Michael, is it doable from your perspective? Your roadmap looks to the future. What sort of harmonization, when we talk about these local or locally cultural conditions, where do you see that we might need digital infrastructure harmonization in the future? And what would that mean to the industry?
Talking about infrastructure, maybe just to build on that, the systems that we are working on as industry, of course, have to have a certain degree of independence from the infrastructure that they're deployed in. So we can't just have, we don't want to have a magnetic lane in the street for our systems to work. So we need to have a certain degree of independence of the infrastructure. So whether they be in the Netherlands or in Germany or in France, that's for sure. So of course, we need to have good connectivity. That's something Markus touched upon. That's important for the vehicles. That's important for the technology. But we need to have clear road signs, standardized road signs. We need to have good standards on the markings on the streets. That's important for the cameras, the sensors to work. These are all important, but independent of what the vehicle will find, it needs to be able to drive safely. This is what we are working on. And so infrastructure is important. Digital infrastructure, of course, is important. The need for harmonization is where we feel that, especially with the way that Europe is we do not want to have, and this is the industry challenge that we see, if we have a European type approval for a vehicle, we do not want to have a Netherlands additional type approval, and then we have another type approval for the city of Amsterdam because the city wants to have something different. So we don't want to have 3 type approvals for one system. That's quite a burden. So we want to have it as simple but as safe as, as simple as possible, but as safe as necessary. And so we need to have some form of harmonization there, that we do not, have too much of a burden for the industry to type approve these systems. I think that's one of the key challenges that we are facing, that of course everyone is aware, but it's sometimes difficult if you have a system of a certain ODD in one city and they have ideas what they want and what they don't want. And then all of a sudden you go to a next city and then the city has totally different ideas, even within the same country, or then if you go to a different country, it starts all over again. And that's a lot of time and energy that and capacity that we would need to invest in. That's something that I think we need to address.
I've been working my way back around you, Mohammed, because I want to know how in DG Grow you manage all these sometimes conflicting, sometimes complementary considerations.
Yes, and I also have some remarks to do. So to come back now to the question about the type approval, if the type approval has to be done more than one time, and I think what we can say that it's not needed. So the type approval itself has to be done only once, but there is something also which happens after the type approval, which is related to the licensing and the registration of the vehicle. And during that process, the member states have still the freedom to request some additional tests. But the type approval itself is only once. And also coming back to this ODD discussion, if the ODDs are different, ODD for the audience is operational design domain. If they are different between countries, we are now in context of the guidelines which we are developing, we are talking about something which we call generic ODD, which is generic without any without geofencing. That means without concrete location. But this will be part of the type approval, so that in addition, only this deltas, the difference to this generic ODD, can be tested in different countries. So by this, we try really to reduce the amount of testing. And then I would like to make another remark regarding the infrastructure and technology and so on. So we, in the regulation, we always have the goal to make the regulation technology neutral, in terms, in order to encourage innovation and also not to restrict. That's why also we don't, in the regulation, we don't specify which type of sensors can be used, and then we keep it open. That means if there is a system which can connect or communicate with the infrastructure, and by this increase the safety, then it is also possible to do it within the regulation.
Before we come on to questions from the audience, so you can have your hands ready and your thinking caps on, I do want to ask all of you in turn to comment on EU leadership in a global context in terms of competitiveness. We are in Brussels. You cannot go a whole panel without mentioning the Draghi report at the moment. So what sort of competitiveness edge can we see in this sector, and how might we drive it? I'll start down the far end with you, Tobias.
Yeah, sure. So I think first and foremost, if we want to have leadership, if we want to be competitive in autonomous driving, we first of all need a very healthy automotive industry in total. OEMs, suppliers, engineering services companies. Yeah, and I think we really need to pay attention that we have that in future to be then also a leader in specific parts. And I do think we already have a lot of very strong points. Yeah, if you look at the safety issue, European automakers always have been leading in passive safety, active safety, driver assistance systems. So safety is a core element of autonomous driving, and it's a strong point of European automakers, and also a lot of technology that you see in today's vehicle has been pioneered or stems from European OEM suppliers, engineering services companies. And also in autonomous driving, you see a lot of projects, a lot of investments from European companies. I think just because we don't see autonomous driving vehicles on the road yet, that doesn't mean that we are not leading there. And we do, by the way, see autonomous drive vehicles. You have the Mercedes and BMW level 3 automated vehicles. You have automated valet parking. It's not on the streets. You don't see it, but it's still there, and also a gated area. So there is a lot, and as I said, I think we need to make sure the autonomous industry stays healthy to also be competitive in those areas in future.
Michael, talk to me about competitiveness, and you can even break the market down further into sectors within it. But how does the EU compete globally?
We always like to think of ourselves as leaders, but I don't think we are, to be honest, in that regard. I think that there are other regions of the world that are very advanced, and we need to keep up. And you mentioned the Draghi report. I'm very happy that there was it was very comprehensive, of course, a lot of topics mentioned, but also automation was in there, scalability of automation, and the necessity for the competitiveness of that topic. So I think it's important. One point I would like to make is we're grateful for DG Grow and their expertise in that regard and the work they're doing, but I think it's not enough. We also need to have other DGs involved, DG Move, DG Connect. Where is the combined? ACEA has put forward their ideas, and I think it would be great to have a kind of a combined work. This is not a criticism for DG Grow, but I think if they work together in that regard, and we have the chance with the new plans for automotive industry, whatever it's going to be, and new green industrial deals. There are a lot of great words out there, and there's a lot of opportunity to put this technology, this idea of a future for Europe into place.
Mohammed, your thoughts on this? There's often this criticism that, we lead in regulation, but we don't lead in other things. How do you make it work?
So thank you. First, I'd like also to give my point of view regarding the competitiveness, and I think it depends on the automation level. Let's say it like this. In my point of view, in the automation level, assisted driving, which we call also L2, and partially automated driving, L3. In my point of view, Europe is still leading. And because we are in heavily discussion with all the industry from all over the world, especially in L3 systems, almost there are now the only two systems in the world which are clearly developed and approved as L3 systems are one from Mercedes and one from BMW. But for L4, it's a little bit different, and it has also some reasons because in Europe we have more the classical OEMs who are going step by step along the automation levels. But in US, for example, we have this big tech companies which can directly jump to one dedicated automation level, which is L4 in that case. So this is about the competitiveness. And now regarding the plans and how to improve there, I can say that we already recognize that we have to do a little bit more together with other DGs. And there are now discussions ongoing at the European Commission level to create something new, which combines expertise from different DGs and also with experts from member states, exactly to solve these problems.
Lennart, your thoughts with the Dutch perspective. I know when we talk about OEMs, we seem to focus on Germany a lot, but give me your perspective on how we can all together contribute towards European competitiveness.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And I'm very passionate about it. I very much agree actually with Michael that we're very grateful what the European Commission did actually on automated driving, because this is very much an example not of regulating, but kind of deregulating and making it possible. And I think that's where we have to go to. And I think for someone from a government perspective, I've been talking quite a lot actually about or tried to talk a lot about the manufacturer's perspective, and that we need to scale up here. An example that I like to use on stage quite often is actually, imagine that we were in the same room in 2008, and I would have asked you to pick your phone from your pocket, and you told me in which country the mobile phone was made actually. Then many phones would have been made in Sweden, or especially with Ericsson, or Germany, Siemens, or from Finland with Nokia. And right now, I'm quite certain your mobile phone is not being produced in the European Union, not the software, not the hardware. It's either from South Korea, or it is from the United States, or any other country. It's not Europe. Right now, if I would ask you which car you're driving, either it's South Korean or European. I like them both actually. Both of very advanced, high quality, and it's very healthy actually to have that competition. But you only have the competition if you have a very strong base of European companies as well. So from the Dutch perspective and from my perspective, I'm very excited about the Drager report. I hope that it will actually be an example to have more that kind of legislation coming from the European Union, as we had with DigiGrow, which kind of deregulates, that gives space to manufacturers to develop themselves within the European Union. Because only then, in 15 or 20 years, we're sitting in this room again, and I would ask you, where's your car being produced, and where was it developed, and where was the technology being developed? Then we have some hints from cars produced from South Korea, some from the United States, and a lot of hints from people driving a European car, and that is very competitive in a global market. And I think that's where we have to go to. And therefore, we need to work of the manufacturers, we need to work of the European Commission. But both the manufacturers and the European Commission should push also the member states sometimes to give up their national autonomy to make it possible that we give that business environment on a European level. Because Europe is quite small on a global scale.
Thank you. So we have about 20 minutes left. Anyone got questions for our panel? We have time to take a few. Hands up if you're going to have another one, but we'll first go to the back row, get a microphone to you.
Thanks, Dudley Curtis from the European Transport Safety Council. So, Michael, you mentioned government support in the US and China. Well, I wanted to mention that in the US, we also have mandatory reporting on crashes involving any vehicle of level 2 and above. We also have the NTSB doing regular independent crash investigations. Maybe Elon Musk will put a stop to all this. We'll have to wait and see. But the EU is not doing any of this. And we know from our members across Europe that the police and independent investigators really struggle to get the data from manufacturers when they're trying to find out if assisted driving systems played a role in the crash. So question for the Commission, are you going to fix this in the access to vehicle data legislation? And question for the industry, will you commit to more transparency about crashes? Because we think this is essential to building public trust about automation, I think, first of all, and also about learning from crashes that have happened and preventing future crashes. Thanks.
Thanks, Dudley. I should have had a large klaxon for the mention of Elon Musk. We managed to make it in nearly 2 hours without mentioning him.
I didn't do it.
Michael, Mohammed, which of you would like to go first?
I can go first very quickly. I think you have heard about the regulations which go in this direction, the EDR, and also the event recording for ADS. So these are kind of horizontal regulations, but which will be, especially for ADS, which will be mandatory. And also EDR will be also mandatory for every kind of automation level. So this is already in place, and this is now advancing. And I think we will have it in the near future.
If I may, I'm sad to hear that this is still a problem. I agree. The EDR, I think, is a great example. We have the Data Act. It's already out there. So I think data sharing is not the problem anymore, to be honest. I don't think that there's a lot of transparency, a lot more than maybe 5 years ago. And I think you're right. In order to make the customers feel safe in the systems, not only do the systems need to be safe, but also the transparency that they can rely on the system, that they can rely on the computer to actually do the job that it's supposed to do. So from my point of view, I think we've, as industry, have come a long way to do that. And we've heard from the Netherlands, there's a good collaboration with the OEMs on that regard. And Markus mentioned that earlier today as well. So I think that it's going in the right direction. I don't think that we need a specific access to in-vehicle data regulation. I mean, we've heard this, I think, since I started this job, talks about this type of regulation. But from my point of view, I think that there are a lot of good regulations out there in Europe, and within the member states, there's a good dialogue on this topic.
I mean, some of this is linked directly or indirectly to questions of liability as well. I mean, how much is that still a debate you're having?
If I may, we've heard from Mercedes level 3 system, and a lot of people thought that, oh, well, now Mercedes has received a type approval for the system because they agreed to take the liability risk. Of course, we as OEMs take the liability risk. If the system is not working correctly and the system is making a mistake, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not in that regard, but we will take responsibility. And if the driver is in charge of steering the vehicle and makes some mistakes, then of course it's the driver responsibility. So I think liability is not a problem. Maybe it is in the conception of some people, but from our point of view, legally, if our systems don't work the way they're supposed to work, then of course we will take responsibility.
Okay, have we more questions? Yes, another one right here at the back.
Hi there. My name is Ben Lowenstein. I'm the European Affairs Manager at Waymo. Question to the panel is on the topic of competitiveness. One of the big advantages, of course, of Europe is the single market. But one of the things that we have in the US is a clear path to not just commercialization, but actually generating revenue from running a service. I'm wondering what the panel thinks, just on the point made from the Netherlands before about giving up some member state competences to create a more European unified framework would look like, and how we can actually get permits to the services once they're type approved.
Thanks, Ben. I think we'll get an answer from the panel here. I think you get a very different one if you ask the council. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to go first, and I just can reiterate my example of long-haul trucking. If you want to do that in Europe, you need to cross borders. And if I had a free wish, I would wish for something like automated driving directive that would set at least a certain framework conditions for all European countries to harmonize, but not only to harmonize. We talk a lot about harmonization, but also to establish in the first place the necessary national road traffic laws that are necessary for automated driving. So I think we have share the same requests there.
Leonard, yeah.
Yeah, maybe briefly, of course, it is up to private companies cases and how they want to make revenues about certain use cases. I know the manufacturers who want to sell, for example, ADAS systems or ADS systems as a kind of upgrade for which you have to pay either monthly or at once. That's all fine with me, but I think when it comes to scaling up these use cases, that's where the regulatory framework comes in. For example, the Mercedes that has been mentioned, the example from Mercedes that has been mentioned, it got type approval in Germany, but it did not get type approval in the Netherlands. And not because we don't trust the system, but because our legal framework is not ready yet to implement the system. So we, as I said in the beginning of the panel, based on the general safety regulation alone, we need to change our legislation based on 7 to 10 pieces of legislation. If we take like the normal route in the Netherlands, that would take up to a decade. So we try to fasten up the process, of course, a little bit here. But that's why I said sometimes it helps to have European legislation and not just a guideline for how to implement something on a national level, because it still means that you need to have all the efforts to translate it into national translation. So I think for a few use cases or for a few pieces of ADS legislation, it helps to have clear European legislation, and that there's actually no choice for member states how to implement it. To prevent it from happening, that is ODD, you have to go to 27 different, and actually more than 27, because we have Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, of course, also in the internal market. So we have up to 30 legal frameworks where you then have to implement it on a national level again, and then actually start your business case. Then, of course, your business case is going to disappear quite quickly.
Michael, Mohammed, thoughts on competencies holding up business cases?
I see it same as Leonard. I think it's up to the private investors and private companies to come up with business cases. And our role at the European Commission is to make it happen, at least from the type approval point of view and from the deployment point of view.
Many more questions. Anyone else? Yeah. All the back row questions today. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the very interesting panel. Andrei Ordake from Here Technologies. I have a question, which I think is mainly from Mohammed, but I think also for the others can comment on that. We are seeing, in terms of automated driving, kind of like a new wave coming from, I would say, from the Chinese, also Tesla and others, where they're bringing automated driving based on deep learning and neural networks, which is kind of like slightly different from what the German OEMs are doing and more of a black box approach. How do you see this in terms of regulation? Is it something that is being considered, or would you see that this would be a bit of a limitation for such systems towards Europe?
Yeah, very good question. So we just had yesterday a meeting internally in general regarding these topics. If you maybe have heard, there were some months ago, the AI Act has been released from the European Commission. And we now are working on identifying the implication of that on the automotive system, because they are quite general. They just categorize the systems in highly risk and no risk systems and so on. And we are now exactly in the phase to identify what does it mean for us, or what has to be changed in the regulations for the automated driving. But we are looking at this, yeah, and we are aware of this. Thank you.
It's a good question. As Marcus mentioned at the very beginning, that there may even be generative AI possible innovations in the future. Michael, yeah.
If I may add to this, I think this is a good point you're making. The AI Act and the future delegated acts on this that will touch on type approval, I think, need to be carefully drafted, because we as industry feel that there is a certain risk that there could be conflicts of interest within the European framework. So whenever you are starting to work on this, I think this is something that we need to be aware of, that the type approval framework is already very complex, and if we add AI to it, it won't make it easier. And the delegated acts that are coming and that are announced for the different sectors, of course, have to be carefully drafted on that.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can add something on that. So my personal view on that is I don't expect too much change, because what we do in the type approval is that we judge the system at a behavior level. That means how the system behaves. And then how did you implement this, if you do it like rule-based or using end-to-end AI, deep learning models? It's part of the technology neutrality, let's say. But this is my first impression, but we have to look at it in details.
Yes,
May I briefly say something? And I try to balance it out here, because there are two perspectives here. The first one, of course, AI has a big impact on society. So you need to have a legal framework to protect citizens when it comes to privacy or many other aspects. So you want to have legislation. On the other hand, here the European Union was also a little bit ahead of time. Actually, we had an AI Act before there was like real AI, let alone on a European level. So where does AI come from right now? Mainly from the United States. We have a few excellent companies here in Europe that actually can develop maybe parts of AI, for example, in the use case of type approval of automated driving. What we therefore need actually is to sit together with these European companies and companies from abroad, but working in the European Union because they're doing their R&D here in Europe, to see what is necessary from a competitiveness point of view and what is necessary from a protecting your citizens point of view. I think one of the risks here, if we keep the same speed of regulation from Europe as we did over the past 10 years, is actually that we regulate those sectors before we see the economic benefits of it. So here, also from my perspective, from how we argue right now within the European Union, I think it's very important that we balance it out between the protecting society to the side effects of certain technology. On the other hand, see the opportunities for society as well, and give space to develop them on a European level. Because right now we're mainly regulating technology that comes from other parts of the world rather than developing them ourselves.
Absolutely. Well, we will give a shout out to the medtech and the fintech sectors, which are very developed from the European side.
Very good.
Any last questions from the floor before I ask for a roundup? Anyone? No. In that case, we have got about 2 minutes each, gentlemen, to give me your final thoughts. Tobias, I'll start with you. What's your ask for the next European Commission mandate? What would you like people to take away from today's discussion, or any future innovations we should be looking towards?
I think I mentioned them already, but let me repeat the two most important ones. First of all, we need a healthy automotive industry, and we don't have digitalization, but we have multiple transitions. Of course, the most important one being decarbonization, and we really need on all sides. It's not only, of course, a regulatory topic; it's also a topic of good company leadership to guide us through this transformation. And then we can be successful in autonomous driving. As I said, a lot of European companies are already active in that field, and we will see autonomous vehicles on the road in Europe. We will see them on the road globally anyway, and we will see them on the road in Europe. It's just a matter of which use cases come first at which point in time. And for that, we need to early prepare the regulatory landscape as we talked in a pan-European way. And also, I think that's also mitigates a little bit concerns. It won't come overnight. We will not see 10,000 autonomous vehicles next year, but it will be a process. And I think that doesn't mean we shouldn't start today, but also it gives a little bit a clarity that we still, even if we start the journey, we still can correct the path. We still have control of it and make it in a safe way. Thanks.
Leonard, what's your look ahead? Where is the Netherlands going to be putting pressure in council, and what's the focus for you in the coming, let's say, 5 years?
5 years. Well, first we have to put pressure on the national level as well, because we have to implement the legislation and general safety regulation that we now have thanks to DG GROW, that we incorporated with since 2016, since we had the Declaration of Amsterdam. What we're pushing for right now is a more integrated approach that has been mentioned a few times here as well, so I'm not the only one who's pushing for it. We had the approach of DG GROW, and we are quite excited about it. As I said, last Friday I was at the high-level road safety to argue that we need to cooperate for proper implementation as well, because there are a lot of advantages for road safety, but therefore need to cooperate. And we will argue and push for a more European approach that reduces the risk of fragmented implementation of the legal framework for automated driving. Because if it's too fragmented, then we risk of losing the advantages for road safety, but also losing competitiveness.
Mohammed, looking ahead, we know you've got a lot of work on your plate. What do you need from industry going forward? What other stakeholders can bring to the table, and what's your outlook?
Yeah. So I think what we would like to have more is more transparency in terms of roadmaps and plans, because it helps us also to define also our own roadmaps. This is something very important. Also more participation, because we have many things to do, a lot of work, a lot of informal working groups where we have to we need experts, we need input to advance things, especially to remove this small series scheme. There we need a lot of work. We need to look at all the existing regulations. And other than that, I'm quite confident that the next years we will improve a lot. Thank you.
Michael, a final roundup from you. I know we looked at the roadmap, and I know you're not going to give away company secrets and market strategy, but to what degree will you be able to work with the Commission and the member states going forward? Give us a sort of a longer view timeline on that.
Yeah, gladly. First of all, I'm grateful for the interest of the audience in this topic. And we are, as an industry, in the middle of a large transformation. To reach the climate goals, this is our focus area. But the topic that we're discussing today, the digitalization, and we touched upon AI, we touched upon software-defined vehicles, touched upon connectivity and automation. These are topics, if we want as Europeans to play a role in this area, then we need to make this a focus of the next 5 years, maybe 10 years. So by 2030, this needs to be something that we are very good at, that we have scalable systems in place, that there are customers actually paying for these services, that there is a realistic development and then experience within Europe. I think that's something that we need and that we are capable of developing together with the Commission, together with the European institutions, with the member states. But that's something that we as industry, we are interested in working on and working with. And so I think this is possible and achievable.
Well, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you for everyone's attention and for the great questions. I will urge you once again, you can go to the ASEA website to read that roadmap in more detail. We want you to continue to share your thoughts using the hashtag FutureDriven. I will remind everyone to go down and check out the great exhibition stage downstairs. It's a fantastic space, and you will see many more events that will be happening here in this space, this ASEA flagship space. Thank you again to the tech team from Euractiv for the panel debate, and a big round of applause for our speakers.